things is a bit different. So let me address some of the points above. Number one, the allowance of any government should always be based on the needs of the peoples being governed. Those peoples should have a direct say in how their taxes are used, what those things are that are taxable, and how much they are taxed, if anything. As the old saying goes, no taxation without representation. No other considerations are to come before that of the nation's own people or land. When issues regarding property conflict with those of people, the rights of people should always outweigh those of property. This includes U.S. government-enabled corporate ventures abroad. Corporate investments are private investments, and corporate liabilities are theirs and theirs alone to bear. If they aren't sharing all profits with all Americans should not be on the hook for corporate failures. We are United States citizens. We did not unilaterally vote on becoming investors, secured or otherwise, into the dealings of private business ventures. Did we? Because I don't recall getting that memo. Maybe it's buried in the stack of bills here. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. When Fannie Mae got Freddie Mac and AIG went bust, it was not the duty or responsibility of the American people writ large to pick up the tab. The profits are private, and therefore the losses should be private as well. When an individual in America can't pay the rent, they get evicted and are made to be homeless. When a corporation fails in America and they are big enough, the government steps in with your money to save them. They do this by printing money. Corporations are not people and should not have the rights of people. As a social and legal construct, corporations have been allowed to form what amounts to modern-day feudal nation-states. Undying monsters that vacuum up wealth, real estate, and intellectual property and never die. In this regard, the Federal Reserve is unique in that it has the advantage of being the only privately owned company in America that is built into the wheelwork of every facet of American life. It was created by an act of Congress, one which abdicated Congress's constitutionally mandated duty and responsibility to print and coin money and determine the value thereof. This is fundamentally important to understand, the huge violation that this was, and continues to be. The government handed our economy to a private business, giving itself the Game Genie cheat codes for infinite money, and then, number two, kicked the legs out from under anyone smart enough to see the poop train coming down the tracks. Nixon, taking the U.S. off the gold standard, allowed the Federal Reserve a monopoly on wealth preservation. Followed, of course, by the federal government outlawing the holding of gold by private citizens with Executive Order 6102, forbidding the hoarding of gold. It's only hoarding when citizens do it. Say, what do you call that system where the government and corporations are working together in unison? I'm asking for a friend, bro. Your money is worth what the corporation allows it to be. Just pray that Uncle Sammy doesn't need a new fleet of warships on your credit card, Mr. and Mrs. America, because the corporations are now the primary political force in America and the world. I'm going to link some articles down here, a bunch of articles related to the things that I'm talking about. So you can see this is not just my opinion. There is numerous outlets of research that have gone into the formation of my opinions on this topic. And I am not the only one thinking these things. So if you want some evidence on this statement that I just made here, take a look at the article, Testing Theories of American Politics, Elites, Interest Groups, and Average Citizens. Links in the description. There's also another article on political action groups and who's footing the bill for these politicians' political campaigns. And if you do some quick math on this, it looks like the Republican candidate is slated to win the selection in 2024. I could be wrong. I don't think this is how this is supposed to work, FedGov. No step on snack. If you don't want to represent the people whom you are taxing the hell out of currently, then the first part of that tired old phrase should and eventually will come into play. No taxation, i.e. people will stop paying at some point. Either because they are unable to do so or out of sheer spite for what this country has morphed into. Possibly both. Number 3, the inflation situation is exponentially made worse by the advent of fractional reserve banking and lending. The following portion of this article is taken from Investopedia. Fractional reserve banking describes a system whereby banks loan out a certain amount of the deposits they have on their balance sheets. Fractional reserve banking facilitates lending, thereby expanding the economy. In most countries, banks are required to keep a certain amount of their customers' deposits in reserve. Banks with a low fractional reserve are vulnerable to bank runs because there is always a risk that withdrawals may exceed their available reserves. Most countries today use fractional reserve banking because it is not feasible to use 100% reserve banking. Moreover, a system that requires banks to hold 100% of deposits cannot create more money without devaluing its currency. Thus, banks would need to hold a significant amount of capital to issue loans. This would greatly reduce the growth in developing and developed economies because the banks could not issue debt to businesses and consumers that rely on it for large purchases and investments. A system backed by precious metals, such as gold, is also prone to this problem. If a specific amount of a country's currency has to be represented by a certain amount of gold, the country is limiting its growth potential because there is a finite amount of gold available to meet the growing demand for capital. The currency value would continuously be reduced. Fractional reserve banking allows a country to grow its money supply to meet the demand for growth. End quote. That was a giant misinformation sandwich. Let's take a bite out of it, shall we? So it's either take our funny money or we have to go back to the gold system that didn't work for us. For us, not you. Way to build a false dichotomy, bro. Did you forget silver, copper, and numerous other precious metals and resources that we could have pegged it onto? There are other options for having a hard resource-backed dollar, and America should be seriously exploring these options yesterday. By allowing banks to lend out more money than they have in deposits, this gives all private banks the same powers to print their own money as the Federal Reserve itself. When a bank creates a loan or a mortgage today, they are not lending you money that someone else deposited. This is a damn lie. They are creating a set of digital ones and zeros on a computer. Then the bank turns around and marks your debt as a deposit in their own account. The Federal Reserve simply arbitrates what percentage of a depositor's money that they must hold on to. Typically, these rates for the last 20 years have floated at about 10%. But then, on March 26, 2020, the Federal Reserve reduced reserve requirements for all depository institutions to zero. Instead, banks are now paid a specific interest rate on their reserve balance to encourage holding reserves. Ta-da! Bank liabilities magically turn into money. Money which they can then use to invest further into real estate, buying their own stocks, lobby politicians and super PACs with, and yes, lend to other schmucks like you for loans and mortgages. And this process expands the money supply exponentially, causing dollar devaluation. How do you like that for a conflict of interest? Pun intended. The institutions responsible for printing the money are directly incentivized to print the money and allowed to do so. And now, they've took the regulator off this mother. Setting the fractional reserve rate to zero was always the goal. This allows the money wizards and gamblers to play all the speculative crap they want, blasting away your buying power with the force of a cracked fire hydrant. Investopedia goes on, if a specific amount of a country's currency has to be represented by a certain amount of gold, the country is limiting its growth potential because there is a finite amount of gold available. End quote. That is the entire point of a hard asset-backed currency. The money available has to be representative of the value available in the country and to the global market. The laws of supply and demand cannot be conned. The money system, however, can be made so murky that the average Joe and Jane America cannot understand how the game is rigged against them. And this goes for businesses too, not just workers. By allowing both corporations and the government unregulated control over the money supply, we allow the following events to transpire. A, the first set of hands to touch the money has the greatest buying power with that money. B, the lag time effect between the addition of liquid or digital currency and leveling of dollar buying power gives a diminishing returns effect to subsequent uses of all money currently in circulation, eventually reaching its true value. C, any and all markets that money touches or even runs parallel to suffers the toxic effects of the printed money. D, the end user, the business owner, the consumer, and the employee always suffers the worst end of this bargain because they are always at the end of the money supply. This phenomenon is known as the first money game. Historically speaking, the practice of changing the value of money already in circulation is fraud. It is a very old scam, and the practitioners of it have had a very long time to perfect the art. Fiat currency systems typically fail in 100-year cycles. The reason why the United States has been able to extend beyond that mark is due to its abusive military presence on the global stage and its disproportionate control of the world's trade of oil via the petrodollar agreement. Number 5. But as with all things touched by fiat, the oil-producing nations of the world have grown leery of trading their black gold for a currency that is less valuable from the time a transaction is made to the time they go to the bank to cash it. This is why the world is now looking down the barrel of Russia's BRICS. I'm going to paraphrase the words of Chris Hinckley here for a moment. America is a giant overgrown baby with a credit card in one hand and a hammer in the other. Another reason America's fiat system endures is because it benefits the people closest to the levers of money creation. The government and the rich are thus incentivized to see this scam and call it legitimate from one year until the next, regardless of how the proles cry in the streets. To admit the system is a scam is to admit culpability in the scam. Going on from Investopedia, banks don't need to hold vast amounts of capital because banks use deposits customers tend to leave in their accounts. Fractional reserve banking frees up capital for the economy. This assists in economic growth by keeping money flowing. End quote. This presupposes that the flow of money is somehow beneficial to the people in all cases. Money should only flow from where there is need to where there is value. Creating money for the sake of having more money in circulation is a one-way ticket to $40 a gallon gasoline. With a hard asset-backed currency like gold and silver, there doesn't need to be more money in a system to keep it going. Only smaller denominations of that currency are needed. We used to call this change, ironically enough. If the system truly becomes gridlocked due to a shortage of money, then the next best step is to add another hard asset to the basket that represents the value of the dollar, then make smaller denominations to offset the now higher value of the dollar. Ta-da! I just solved your problem. Some wackadoodle on the internet just solves the problem of hard currency. For example, if you have a currency based on gold and the economy needs more liquid to gain momentum, add silver into the basket. Not enough still? Add copper. Still not enough. Add other commodities such as gemstones or anything physical and valuable and shelf stable. How about America drills its own oil, for instance? Units of currency lower than $20 bills are becoming less and less used in everyday transactions as a direct result of the money printer going burr. The money system has moved in the inverse direction of a healthy, stable, and honest system. Perpetual growth is a fantasy. The sane, the adults, need to step up and take the credit card away from America, cut up the plastic, and throw it into the garbage. There is a finite amount of resources, therefore there should be a finite amount of money. Disregarding this principle and simultaneously lying to your citizens is outright theft. It is a willfully, knowingly, maliciously planned and orchestrated crime, one that takes place in the halls of Washington, D.C. on a minute-to-minute basis. It says that the government's interests supersede those of the people. We want a pony and we want it right now. And we're going to buy it with your money. You don't want to give us your money? Don't worry, we'll just print more and make yours worth less. Banks stimulate the economy by lending. This is more from Investopedia here. The economy needs capital to grow. Banks meet this need by using funds held in reserve to issue loans to businesses and consumers. For example, mortgages, auto loans, and other loans are all made possible by fractional reserve banking. Without it, most consumers wouldn't have the means to afford homes and other necessities of modern life. Wrong again. And more gaslighting on the subject of fractional reserve banking. That isn't how this works. I just covered that. That's not how this works. And also, without the added pressure of loan, mortgage, money creation, your dollar would be worth more. Thus, you would need less money to purchase your home, car, business, startup, what have you. The same forces creating the problem are the ones telling us how great that their stupid remedies are. The reason why these things are so expensive is because of money lending. Let me ask you, which do you believe came first, dollar devaluation or federally incentivized lending institutions? I'll insert the Jeopardy music later. Investopedia continues, allows for regulation. These are supposed to be the benefits of fractional reserve lending banking. Central banks can use reserve ratios as a macroeconomic tool, for regulating the economy. Increasing reserve requirements reduces lending, thereby cooling the economy. These are the terms, as an aside, these are the terms that the FedRes uses all the time. If you were wondering what heating up or cooling down is referring to, this is it. Decreasing the reserve requirements encourages lending, thereby expanding the economy. This tool is rarely employed by the Federal Reserve, but is still used by other central banks, notably the People's Bank of China. Excuse me, can you please explain to me what your definition of rarely is? In the last 4 years alone, they've been playing yo-yo with the economy. Even the staunchest of bulls are about ready to sue the Fed for whiplash. It's not just the things that the Fed does and puts on paper and puts into policy. It's also the things that their chairman and their board members go on to social media and the media at large and yap and yap and yap about the rates go up, the rates go down, the rates go up. This has a tangible impact on the economy. You can see it happen every time Janet Yellen or Jerome Powell or any of those groups get on air. We're in some market volatility territory every time they open their mouths. So let's take a step back from the Fed and take a closer look at the worker. So how does all of this affect you individually? I want to take the example of the American worker and put it into perspective here. The American laborer, be it blue collar, white collar, and even government employees would fall under this umbrella, have always operated under the following contract. Both implicit and explicit promises are at play here. The explicit promise to the American worker is that their job will pay them a set amount of money for a given job at a given rate, and that this amount of pay for this given job will not change unless sufficient justification and notification are given. These explicit promises are largely codified into U.S. law. They are generally well recognized and followed. The implicit promise is the promise of the government itself to those that toil in the labor force and also the employers who own the respective businesses. The implicit promise is that the buying power of the currency, the US dollar, will stay true to the value of the same wages, time, and job from one day until the next. Despite the constant railings on both left and right sides of the political aisles, it is the implicit promise that has been violated time and time again by the federal government. Only now it's become more tangible for Americans. So I've got another article here out of CNBC. The U.S. national debt is rising by $1 trillion about every 100 days. So again, doing some pro math, that comes out to $10 million every day this year, or $6,944 every minute. So the federal government is spending more money in 1 minute than the average person makes in a month. I've heard many people, particularly of the right-wing persuasion, lest we leave them out, rail at length on how this is all due to the handout programs like Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, welfare, food stamps, etc., etc. And linking another article here. In 2023, the federal government spent $6.13 trillion, with the majority spent on Social Security. Well, we can kind of thank Bill Clinton for hoovering that up way back when. So while this is certainly true, the bottom line is that if the United States had an honest currency, we would have honest wages. And with honest wages and honest prices, people would have less need for federal assistance, which makes me think the reason why people don't have honest money is specifically to ensure that Americans do need such assistance. So I've got some data out of fiscaldata.treasury.gov. The amount by which spending exceeds revenue, $1.2 trillion in 2024, is referred to as deficit spending. A budget deficit occurs when the money spent exceeds the money collected for a given period. In 2023, the federal government spent $1.7 trillion more than it collected, resulting in a deficit compared to 2022. The national deficit increased by $320 billion in 2023. The national debt is the money the federal government has borrowed to cover the outstanding balance of expenses incurred over time. To pay for a deficit, the federal government borrows additional funds, which increases the debt. Other activities contribute to the change in the federal debt, such as changes in the Treasury's operating cash account and federal student loans. Hey, do you remember when they were talking about student loan debt forgiveness? Do you remember when Biden was talking about that? I haven't really heard anything on that lately. We're all still hoping and waiting for change. The total debt for the U.S. through June 13th, 2024 is $34.68 trillion. At the end of 2023, the government had $33.17 trillion in federal debt. In 2023, the national debt increased by $2.24 trillion compared to 2024. So please explain to me how our taxes are paying for anything year after year after year of deficit spending. GDP is in the toilet by comparison. And here's some links for that. In fiscal year 2024, the federal government has collected $3.29 trillion in revenue. The federal government collects revenue from a variety of sources, including individual income taxes. Yeah, we all know that one. Payroll taxes, corporate income taxes, and excise taxes. It also collects revenue from services like admission to national parks and customs duties. In 2023, the federal government collected $4.44 trillion. The primary source of revenue for the U.S. government in 2023 was individual income taxes. That's basically almost always their primary source there. That's 4 straight years of deficit spending. Uncle Sam cannot cover the interest, let alone the premium on its debts anymore, even after hitting the triple fours in 23. Once you have all the pieces arranged, it's hard not to come to the conclusion that you are being robbed in real time, that every passing minute of your day, the government is undermining your livelihood. The only way for a company to pay its workers fairly is to implement dynamic wages that can adjust in real time to dollar devaluation. So remember, going back to that $6,944 that the federal government is spending every minute, well, we'd have to have some kind of an algorithm. Maybe we can put AI on this job to figure out what an employee's wages should be. It would also be necessary for each business to do the same to the costs of their products and services. This, of course, will never happen. If it did, I'd wager that would single-handedly annihilate this world's economy. Every business would fail, everyone laid off, martial law, riots, war, game over. You get the picture. Inflation and devaluation are tools that were designed to slowly, over the course of decades, lower the wages of the W-2 and 1099 workers to the value that your overlords think you are truly worth, which is zero. In case you are wondering, they think labor should be free. You don't even deserve to breathe the same air as them. Kings do not pay serfs for their labor. You only get to continue breathing at their whim. That's the contract, the new contract that they would like you to sign at gunpoint if necessary. We are now approaching the end of this process, folks. Are we getting the government that we're paying for? Healthcare, infrastructure, education, defense. Those are the basics. Maybe I missed one. Law enforcement. I don't think we are. Just my personal opinion. And I sincerely doubt I am the only one that thinks this. Defense should be like the bare minimum of a government's responsibility to its people. But just this week, Russian warships and submarines arrived in Cuban waters armed with nuclear weapons. It seems like everything's business as usual. The DoD either failed to halt the Russian moves or they were specifically told not to. And neither scenario paints a good picture for America. Yeah, we just had another Cuban Missile Crisis, Chapter 2. Oops, we forgot to blockade them this time. Where was Mark Warner to hold the line? Where was Lindsey Graham, Nikki Haley, Dr. Rumor, Patrick Clausen, Bill Kristol, Hillary Clinton? Anybody? Hello? Politicians and the uber riche, they're not building underground bunkers to protect themselves from nuclear attack, despite all of that. They're building bunkers to protect themselves from you, the poor people, because soon, very soon, the con will be up and the marks called. We are the marks. I am dubbing this new phenomenon Excelflation. You like that? It's accelerated inflation. That's when the Triffin dilemma comes and the Fed Gov is not going to bother reaching for the 11th marble because they already know there are no marbles. Schrodinger never owned a cat. As the federal government borrows/prints money, the need for the money increases. The effect is cumulative and can only be reversed by removing money, both physical and digital, from circulation. A process which I'm not aware has ever transpired during my 40 years on this planet. At least not in America. The effect is like that of a severe drug addict always needing a bigger dose to maintain a high. Eventually, the OD hits. Only when that happens, we're the ones that get shoved into the pine box. The FedGov is beyond the responsibility of its citizens anymore, and so will continue this course of spending us into a black hole. At this point, it is inevitable. I'd like to clarify my thoughts on a few things. I have heard many people's opinions on the current state of our economy, and one of those reoccurring themes that I keep coming across is corporate greed. Corporate greed is what's causing wages to stagnate. Corporate greed is what's causing prices to soar. And I'm not saying that there isn't corporate greed at least partially responsible for those things. But I don't believe that that is the sole reason for it, nor the greatest reason for it either. It's my sincere hope that I've dissuaded at least some of whom may hear this of that notion, because it's very narrow-minded, and by corporate greed, by constantly droning on like that, nothing gets solved. You're always going to have greedy people in the world. You can't get rid of them all. They're going to be around. They're going to be in your family groups, your friend groups. You're going to work for them. Hell, some of you might be them. They're going to be around. Greed is never going away. But the thing that we can solve is creating an honest money system. And we used to have one in this country. And we could again. Corporations are a large part of how the wages and prices got to where they are. But it's not every corporation that is responsible for it, nor is it every person in the corporate world that caused this. It is devaluation, not inflation. The devaluation of the dollar, coupled with shipping out nearly all the decent paying manufacturing jobs to foreign countries. Countries, by the way, with labor laws that border on being slavery. The same countries that our politicians constantly tell us are the enemy of the United States. And yet we rely on them for almost all of our industry. Someone make it make sense, because it don't. China bad, China bad. Meanwhile, you're up there on Amazon on your phone buying all kinds of made where? China. And even if you were so inclined and you had the money to do so, to go out and buy American and only American, if you crack open those products, I guarantee you there's components in there that were made where? China. Made out of materials mined from where? China. And they have this funny little system. As long as something was substantially transformed in a different country, even if all those constituent parts came from other countries, including China, as long as it was substantially transformed, that is now considered the country of origin. Isn't that magic? Another notion that I'd like to swat down like the bothersome fruit fly that hangs, hovers an inch right in front of your face, is that we should somehow be expected to innovate our way into being more competitive with China. That actually came out of the mouth of former Senator Ron Paul. Senator, how do you propose that America innovates their way to competition with China's free 99 labor costs? How do you propose that we compete with China's unfair cost advantage for shipping when they have the developing nation status rolling out the red carpet for them on the Baltic Dry Index? You got an answer for that one? And 2 more articles I'm going to pop down with relation to that. The only thing you could be referring to here is automation, and that industry is nowhere near the Jetsons level technology we would need for full industry automation. And if we ever do hit that point, it will drive the final nail into the coffins of the working class forever. Not just here in America, everywhere. So everybody's salivating, oh, we're going to work 3 days and 5-hour work weeks and all this other crap will just usher us down the cattle chute onto universal basic income. It will virtually guarantee it. Everywhere, not just here in America. This technology isn't as great as you think it is. On paper, on the sci-fi novels, yeah, that sounds great. In practice, in real life, how's it looking out there, Mr. and Mrs. America? You know what? Thank you, Ron Paul, for showing the world your macaroni art that you're trying to pass off as a good idea. Now, please slide back into the cupboard of obscurity whence you came from. When you outsource labor to a foreign country, you siphon money out of the parent country into the economy of the other. That means roughly 3/4 of the profits never return to the United States. In every industry that money touches and every service they use represents money that is stolen from America. Material acquisition, refining, manufacturing, shipping, administrative services, contracting services, utilities, and even states' revenues are all lost to a foreign entity. Now, depending on the trade relations going in the opposite direction, it is very likely that money stays where it lands. In a previous video, I stated that every business in America will eventually reach a point where it either embraces a certain level of corruption or that business will fail. And this may be anecdotal on my part, as I have seen that this is true in almost every place that I've ever worked. Some places more egregious than others, mind you. And I've also found corruption while researching every single major company I've ever looked into. You don't necessarily condemn these companies. I don't necessarily, depending on the issue at hand. And the reason for that is the system is rigged against everyone. And when you get up high enough, when you go to the Wharton Business School of Economics, when you go to Princeton and Yale, you learn these things. You learn how the machine really works. And those that don't go along to get along are not, they're only allowed to reach a certain level of success in this country. There are outliers, but they're just that, outliers. Even the rich will eventually suffer under the crushing weight of a failed currency, but I suspect that the monopoly board is going to get flipped before the pain reaches that high. And in will come the golden savior of digital currency, or CBDC, central bank digital currency. And they'll sell it to us with debt forgiveness and free healthcare as the bait. And you'll accept the mark, because at that point you will own nothing, and you will not be happy. The contract with the American worker is broken. The contract with the American business owner is broken. We're not operating on an even playing field. We can't, because the money does not allow for fair play. It does not allow for a free market. Every time you transact in the society, you are giving somebody less money than what they asked for the product or service that they're performing for you. Right down the line. It makes us all complicit in the fraud just by using the money in the first place, because it's being devalued by the second. $6,944 a minute our government spends. And when it spends money, remember, the government's not out. They don't have condos. They don't got golf courses that are government run and operated. They're printing the money. And when the government prints money, it devalues the currency. When private individual banks, private or publicly traded banks, lend a mortgage or a loan to you, that also prints money, which creates devaluation. Devaluation hits the market, turns into inflation. And you're on the bottom of that money chain. That is the broken contract. That is the reason why everything is so expensive and will continue to get more expensive. That is the reason why your wages are stuck right where they are, because the money is stuck at the top, and it keeps getting pumped to the top. This process pumps money to the top of society and keeps it there. You or I do not have the power to do what the federal government and the Federal Reserve Bank can do. A private corporation. And therefore, it does not matter how much money that you make. Your money can be infinitely devalued when a government can create infinite money. And that is what they're doing essentially right now. So yes, there are greedy corporations. Yes, there are greedy individuals. But the real problem is the currency itself. And I am so tired of hearing people complain that companies are greedy. That is not the core issue. It's part of it. It's most definitely part of it. And some are more complicit in the scam than others. But most people don't have a clue that this is even happening. It's not that people do not want to work. They want to be able to survive. They want to be able to live dignified lives, to raise their family, to not have to live hand to mouth and constantly worry when the next emergency expense comes up that they might be out on the streets. Or if they're already out on the streets, that they might starve to death or die from exposure. You've got homeless people that are working. The homeless working. That is a continuously growing population in this country. You see people out in the tents and stuff like that, and you think they're just sitting on their ass. You think a lot of these guys are, I'm sure. But the ones that are out there working, you don't know about it. If you were in their shoes, let me ask you, would you go around telling everybody that you know that you're homeless? No, you wouldn't, because it's embarrassing. And how many people would want to hire a homeless person? Would you, if you had a business? The idea that we're going to somehow raise the minimum wage to overcome the cost of living is insane. It will not work. And I hope I just explained all the reasons why. It is not the wages that need to go up. It is the cost of living that needs to go down. And the only way to do that is with a sound